Hello there. This is All 24 News special coverage on the Russia-Ukraine file coming to you live from Algiers. I'm your host, Grifa Zachary. So here's what's on tap today. Russian missiles hit the port of Odessa a day after Russia and Ukraine, with mediation by the United Nations and Turkey, signed a deal to reopen Black Sea ports and resume grain exports. Moscow says it hit military infrastructure. Ukraine pressed ahead with efforts to restart grain exports from Odessa and other Black Sea ports after the missile attack that cast doubt over whether Russia would honor the deal aimed at easing global food shortages caused by the war. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian missile strikes on Odessa were obvious barbarism that showed Moscow could not be trusted to implement the grain deal. Analysts say that the missiles did not hit the port's grain storage area or cause any significant damage, and Kiev said preparations to resume grain shipments were ongoing. To analyze further the developments, I am joined live via Skype from France by Manuel Pouchelet, a university lecturer and geopolitical analyst, along with Abdel Toumi, journalist and Maghreb studies expert. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. We start the discussion right after this. To have more insights about the latest development, let me share with you the latest info regarding the updates on the Russia-Ukraine file. Ukraine says Russia has attacked its main port in Odessa less than 24 hours after the two warring nations signed a deal to release grain exports from Ukraine's southern port. Moscow said it hit a military target during the Saturday strike. The details in the following report.
Only a few hours after Moscow and Kiev negotiated a deal allowing crucial grain supplies to depart Odessa, the important Black Sea port came under fire. Inhabitants were terrified for their lives, as smoke plumes could be seen all across the city. The military of Ukraine claimed that two Russian-caliber cruise missiles struck structures of the port and that its air defense destroyed two more.
Today, the day after the signing of the grain export agreement, Russia attacked the port of Odessa with three M54 caliber missiles. Unfortunately, there are injured people and also damaged port infrastructure.
While Turkish defense minister said the strikes had not negatively affected loading at the docks. Ukrainian foreign ministry has called the attack a spit in the face of Turkey. And the United Nations, which helped broker the shipping agreement while the Ukrainian president has condemned it.
Today's Russia missile attack on Odessa, on our port, is a cynical one, and it was also a strike to the political positions of Russia itself.
Similarly, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres Saturday condemned the missile attacks on Ukraine's Odessa. Russia said it hit a military target during a Saturday strike on the Ukrainian port city of Odessa.
Caliber missiles destroyed military infrastructure in the port of Odessa with a high-precision strike.
Saturday's incident came just a day after Russia and Ukraine, along with the UN and Turkey, signed a deal in Istanbul to unblock exports of grain, food and fertilizers from Ukrainian ports that had been held up by the ongoing conflict. Friday's deal would help lift a Black Sea blockade that exacerbated global hunger, especially in Africa and the Middle East.
Well, let's kick it off with you, Mr. Abdel Toumi. Ukraine could export 60 million tons of grain in 8 to 9 months if its ports were not blockaded. But Russia's strike on the port of Odessa showed it will definitely not be that easy. How do you read this latest development, Mr. Abdel Toumi?
First of all, good afternoon, sir. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon to our distinguished guests. Yes, it is. I mean, we entered now the 150 days, and we are in the third phase.
Mr. Abdel Toumi, sorry to cut you right there. It seems that we are having technical problem with the sound. Perhaps we're going to call you back. Let me redirect the question to Mr. Manuel Pouchelet. Mr. Manuel Pouchelet, the Ukrainian military had said Russian missiles hit the southern ports on Saturday, threatening a deal signed just one day earlier to unblock grain exports from Black Sea ports and ease global food shortages caused by the war in Ukraine. And even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia could not be trusted. How do you read that?
Yes, in fact, this event is a way of Mr. Putin to show that at the moment he has got a military dominance above the Ukrainian territory. And striking with Caliber missile is a strong message also to the international community to say we are managing the situation. But according to, of course, some experts, we don't have any declaration for the defense ministry representative at the moment. So we don't know exactly where this strike comes from. And it would be nice to have some news about this event. But also Odessa is an important symbol in the history of Ukraine and also in the Russian history too.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Abdel Toumi is back with us, so let us just have a listen to his own analysis. Mr. Abdel Toumi.
Good afternoon again, Good afternoon. And sorry for this technical problem. Yes, I mean, now we are in the 150 days of this war, and as we all know, we entered a third phase of this war, which means we are totally in this dynamic of the fog of the war. But however, the deal that was brokered on Friday by the UN, Turkey, and to ease this relief for the entire world who is now facing a food crisis. And so there is always dynamic support, and when something starts to, let's say, see
It seems, Mr. Abdel Toumi, we are having the same technical problem with the sound. We let the gallery room handle that. Mr. Manuel Pouchelet, don't you think that the war perhaps now is taking another phase? I mean, it's the whole war of the whole continent, let's say, that is a big threat to Europe. Could you please tell us what's your take on this regarding the phase? What kind of phase did the Russia-Ukraine war enter?
Yes, I think that we are entering in a new phase at the moment because concerning Mr. Putin's objectives, conquering the east part of Ukraine, it has already been done. And for him, the new phase is to trying to find out a solution on these new territories. And last week, we heard that Mr. Putin is proposing Russian passports in the area, like to erase the past of this region. I'm talking about Donbass, of course. The new goal of this new phase is also the stabilization in the eastern part of Ukraine. But regarding also considering the history of the Russian army on Russia too, maybe they will be back in other places of Ukraine. The final goal is to remove Mr. Zelensky's government and Mr. Zelensky himself. So we don't have any idea of how it will go and how long it will last, in fact. But according to this new message of delivering grain, it's an engagement, a commitment of Mr. Putin with his supporters. I'm talking mainly about Middle Eastern countries and African countries. 3 weeks ago, he had the visit of Mr. Macky Sall, the president of Senegal, and is a representative of an important African organization. And Mr. Macky Sall was asking for a Russian support concerning grain and food. And of course, Mr. Putin did that and is committed in that field. This is I think it's a new step in this conflict, in this crisis.
And Mr. Manuel Pouchelet, why every single time we see that the food crisis or global food crisis is being highlighted every single time and linked to the Russia-Ukraine war, although the crisis existed before? And we see that world leaders perhaps fell short in reassuring the world or perhaps securing food security, since we have many countries such as Sudan in Africa and other countries that could potentially be a global food basket for the whole world, to feed from. Why the world leaders are not doing enough perhaps to settle this food crisis once and for all?
it's a way of communication like it was before. In the last time, it was food against oil. And today, it's a war with grain. And I think that today, most of the African countries and Middle Eastern countries need to reconsider their food dependence. It's difficult. It's also the same in a European country too, also with natural resources, with gas. But today, this crisis is giving us strong lessons. And we are above 150 days. And regarding the American doctrine, they have done already the early lessons. Early lessons, most of the time, are done after 90 days. And today, the crisis is entering in a new phase. And of course, the food is coming because we will, by the end of September, we will enter in autumn, and the time, the weather, will be more fresh. So that's why they are pushing up and they are in a hurry a little.
Very nice indeed. Mr. Abdenour Toumi has joined us back via phone now. Mr. Abdenour Toumi, just to paraphrase my questions, are the 120 days of the peace deal and the lift of restrictions of Ukrainian ports enough to halt the world food crisis? And what can you tell us about the latest development by Russia, what that seems to be breaking the deal? It seems that Mr. Abdenour Toumi is not with us yet. So, Mr. Manuel Pouchelet, I have to continue with you. To what extent can the Russian-Ukrainian deal under UN and Turkey, let's say, auspices, would contribute to overcome the threats of the world food crisis?
Yes, I think the important goal of Turkey is important to underline today, because the Turkish president, Mr. Erdogan, has a significant role play in this crisis. It's a way also to show to European Union a strong speech and a strong speech delivered to European Union leaders, it's impossible for them to manage a situation with Mr. Putin, of course. And a lot of economic emerging countries depend on Russian support. But Mr. Putin is also a key player in this crisis. And at the moment, he's got all the advantages. He's got the clock, as Mr. Macron say, and he's the master of clock. And also, he's the only person who is able to solve and to help the other countries. And it will be important to underline today that Mr. Putin wishes is to be determined in its objectives. The role played by Turkey is also important, maybe because Mr. Erdogan is expecting some news concerning Russia and support.
Very nice indeed. And I hope that Mr. Abdenour Toumi is finally back with us. Mr. Abdenour Toumi?
Yes, I am with you. I can hear you, yes.
Perfect. So you can resume on your answer.
I didn't hear the last answer.
Yeah, so technically we were talking about the Russia-Ukraine grain shipment deal and Russia breaking the deal in the latest report. So if you could tell us how important this deal is to solve the food crisis or the global food crisis, and how do you read the latest development?
Okay, sure. It is actually a great deal that was brokered by the UN and Turkey, and indeed to ease to the entire pain that was the southern part of the hemisphere worried about, and notably the Africans and even in North Africa countries. But as far as the yesterday's strike on the Odessa port, it is to some extent a process that always took place while there is something to be seen, like a ray of hope to be seen in this conflict, and to undermine this huge, I would say, historic moment toward the world and to the people who are worried about this, the cost of living, and even some politicians who are concerned also about eventually the anger of people who will raise up and lead to some extent to some revolts like we experienced like decades ago, and notably in the Arab world. So this is a good sign for the entire, world. However, the war itself, or the dynamic of the war, it continues, and this is very interesting. And both belligerents, Russians and Ukrainians, are also like holding onto their bases and also toward their local public opinions. And none of them, they don't want to give in. So this is why, again, as I said, and I believe Professor Pushley mentioned, we entered into a third phase, an interesting phase now that we all understand and know that this war is going to be long, and to the best scenario will be hold up and will be like orchestrated or be seen as one of those frozen conflicts. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, there is a negotiation process that never ended, even though it's not in front and it's not on the lights now, but there is something going on between the two countries, because both countries, they know well they cannot, let's say, break through a final victory. So this is why we saw now the role of the UN and also the role of Turkey. I believe there is an important point here to mention between the role of the UN, that we the observers, we were worried and we were asking the question, where is the UN? But on last Friday, deal that was brokered by the role of the UN, and Turkey actually gave a new resurrection to the UN. But there is another important point here. It was orchestrated by the two men who are President Erdogan and Secretary Guterres, because the two men, they know each other very well. This goes back to the years where Mr. Guterres was the Commissioner-Chief of the UNHCR and dealing with Erdogan with the Syrian crisis. So this is what created this trust between the two men and helped to let Turkey position itself in the posture of a facilitator, eventually to play, in the future, a role to break through on this crisis between the Russians and the Ukrainians.
Yes, and Mr. Antonio Guterres did describe this as a hope, or let's say a beacon of hope. Mr. Abdel Toumi, how do you see this, let's say, attack by Russia to the port of Odessa? Could it be a major blow to the deal, or is it just a minor incident?
I believe it is just an incident. I don't think I would say, undermine entirely the deal. And as I stated earlier, this happens in any negotiation process. There is something like to indeed let the other part show in and say its full card, saying, okay, I'm still here. And especially the Russians now, even though the Russia cannot afford this to be an obstructionist on this issue, because as I said, the entire world is looking for this, let's say, window of hope. And also, don't forget, even these days and today, Mr. Lavrov visited to Africa and he started in Egypt. And I don't think Russia could, let's say, undermine this deal while going to African, Mr. Lavrov making African tour and going empty-handed. So the Africans are seriously worried, so that some North African countries like Egypt, Sudan, and even Tunisia, we saw just last week in Mauritania some protests, and even in Morocco. So people are really worried, and I don't think Russia can afford this, let's say, obstructionist role, or to undermine the deal that was actually President Erdogan and Secretary Guterres worked very, very hard to break through and give again or to relief for the people in this part of the world. Actually, the grain or the food crisis is a serious, is a major problem for the people in the south. Europe is not really concerned. Some Europe, especially, but Europeans are more concerned about energy, less about food and the grain.
Very nice indeed. Thank you indeed, Mr. Abdel Toumi. And putting the deal aside, we see that President Vladimir Zelensky said clinching perhaps a peace deal is far off or far away. And President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a video address that his country's forces are gradually moving into the Eastern Kherson region in an attempt perhaps to regain the lost territories to Russian occupation. Let's have a listen and then we discuss.
This day you can see how far we have gone towards our victory. It's coming. First of all, we can now speak about Kherson region. The occupiers have been trying to establish a foothold there. Their collaborators made many brazen statements, which in Russian is called by a very apt word, hat-kicking. But how did it help them? The Ukrainian armed forces are moving into the region step by step.
Back to you, Mr. Manuel Puchle. Can we say that Ukraine is really reclaiming its war-stricken territories and gaining back its, let's say, lost territories to Russian occupation? Because we see every single time that the Russians are portraying as though they have taken control of the whole Donbas region, while we see Ukrainian authorities always showing that they are resisting and not the whole region has fallen to the Russian forces. How do you read this?
Of course, yes. Mr. Zelensky is a person who has a strong communication at the moment. But according to the battlefield, Russia as Russian armed forces has a big advantage. But however, we have to say that, of course, Ukrainian army is supported by Western countries and American. And of course, at the moment, they received new weapons who are helping them to fight and to strike back Russian forces, which is, I think, this is a message shown on would like to deliver Mr. Zelensky today. But we don't forget that today, if we want to have peace in Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky said we need to recover all the territories.
And how realistic is this? Are we going to see this really happening in the ground?
Yes, at the moment I think it's difficult because Russian army deployed a new missile. Caliber missiles are really new according to the military forces. Of course, Ukrainian is asking to have new weapons, but as I say in the former program, they need to develop a new doctrine of use because weapons today, it's not only an asset, it's also a doctrine deployed on the ground. And according to Mr. Zelensky, he's very happy to have the benefit of this support, but how long it will stay? Because at the moment, he's got the support of Mr. Biden.
Very nice indeed. Then, Mr. Abdel Toumi, can you tell us how realistic is a peace deal here? Can we say that Ukraine is indeed reclaiming its war-stricken territories from Russia? And we know that Russia has not used all its force in this war.
I mean, it is from the early days of this war, and President Zelensky was focusing on the communication aspect, and he wanted to some extent. So this is why, these days, and we noticed lately, it's been for the last 2 months, the Russians, they shifted the entire strategy of the dynamic of this conflict on the east. So, and of course, on the ground, the Russians shows some victories and are making, going further. So President Zelensky cannot tell first of all, his people and his supporters and even main, let's say, global powers like the U.S., who knows, the U.S. knows very, very well the dynamic of this conflict. And so this is the continuation of the communication war that President Zelensky has been using this narrative for two reasons, actually to do not, again, let's say, downgrade the morale of his troops and also his people, even though the Ukrainians are very tired because they know well and they see the damage that has been caused by this war, and we're not speaking too much about this, and the humanitarian crisis, and the people, the Ukrainian people who are actually, either living in, who left the country or has been displaced within the country. So it is, again, there is a narrative that President Zelensky has been using, and he continues to use, and we just saw, the last, 48 hours, when he sent the Ukrainian First Lady, his wife, to the U.S. to make the case before the American politicians that, don't leave us alone. On the other side, it is very, very difficult, especially for the Europeans, notably France, Germany, and we saw the political crisis now in Italy, and so on, and how Europe is totally fractured by this. And so, Europe is in a very tough and difficult position because now there is another.
But Mr. Abdelnour Toumi, many analysts are saying that Europe has never been that united as it is the case here with the Russia-Ukraine war. And despite the fact that the purchasing power is declining in Europe, despite the fact that many European citizens are actually feeling the repercussions of this war, we see those politicians and a lot of leaders showing this unity in front of Russia. How can you read this?
Actually, again, you said it. It's not. It is not that united. President Putin, when he started this war, the Europeans felt that this is our opportunity to show the world our local public opinions to be united. However, it didn't last because, again, even the Europeans, when they showed, quote-unquote, their support for the Ukrainians, it was just the last thing we can do. So it was just, we heard about some intelligence service helping the Ukrainians and the French Kenyan Caesars who are trying to shape the dynamic of this war like the Turkish drones. But in the end of the day, and 6 months later, the Europeans are divided, and even the local public opinions who are less and less interested in this conflict because they start to feel the repercussions of this war, and notably going on their cost of living and especially the high price
Very well
of
understood,
energy.
Mr. Abdelnour Toumi. And just to show this striking differences and perhaps division, Hungary's Prime Minister has said that the conflict in Ukraine will only end when peace talks are held between Russia and America. Viktor Orban said sanctions against Moscow have not worked and that the European Union needs a new strategy to end the conflict. I get back to you, Mr. Manuel Pouchelet. What kind of new strategies can the European Union here implement on the war in Ukraine since sanctions against Moscow have not worked?
In fact, it's difficult to say what strategy European Union will deploy today because at the moment, what we know is that Hungary is pro-Russia. And this question of Ukrainian crisis is divided European Union leaders and, of course, the public opinion on this crisis. What we have to know today, we don't have any idea of the future of the strategy. But as we saw on your pictures, we can see that we didn't see Mr. Putin, but we saw Mr. Shoigu, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, which is also a symbol. In fact, it's military leaders who are acting, and we didn't see Mr. Lavrov too. So, which is a strong message of the Kremlin and a strong speech on to maintain its objectives. But I think on the long-term period, it will be difficult for the European Union leaders to hold the same speech on the long time, I think.
Thank you so much, Mr. Manuel Pouchelet. Mr. Abdelnour Toumi, thank you for your thorough analysis along with Manuel Pouchelet. Thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News. We have reached the end. Bye for now.